Welcome, everybody. This is February 26th, our Society of American Archivists student chapter, otherwise known as SAASC. My name is Rebecca Billings, pronouns she, her. I'm the vice chair, and welcome to everyone who's making time tonight. We have our special guest with us. We are welcoming Laura Uglean-Jackson. She oversees the Archives Department at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. She's a manager of a small unit and develops policies, procedures, and workflows to improve access, storage, and preservation for digital and analog collections. She supervises one full-time staff member and several volunteers. She does traditional archival work such as accessioning and processing. She is also the museum's de facto records manager, and she administers the digital asset management system for the science division. Uh, Laura has many years' experience in archives and previously worked at the University of Northern Colorado, the University of California in Irvine, and the University of Wyoming American Heritage Center. She holds an MIS from Simmons University and a BA in art history from Colorado State University. She's a leading expert in archival, reappraisal, and deaccessioning, and has also published and presented on born digital processing, backlog management, and collection development. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you for that introduction.
Absolutely. We're really glad to have you here.
Oh, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I did prepare just a few slides just to help introduce myself, I guess, and tell you a lot more about my background. Um, as Rebecca mentioned, I have worked at a lot of places in my career. And so that's basically what my presentation is about. So I will try not to blab on and on for too long because I definitely want to hear from all of you and I want to make sure that I answer all of your questions. I'm happy to talk about pretty much anything you want to ask me or anything you want to discuss. I'm kind of up for it. So I don't know how helpful I'll be in some certain areas, but yeah, definitely looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Good.
So,
That was like real world experience. And for everyone here after the presentation, we'll just use the remainder of the hour to do Q&A. So please do save your questions for Laura.
great. Okay, screen share. Can you see that one slide? Okay, awesome. Great. So, yeah, my name is Laura Uglean-Jackson, pronouns she, her. Digital archivist right now at Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So, okay. So I will say that I wasn't going to prepare any slides, and then I found a slide deck. So from an interview that I did when I interviewed at the University of Northern Colorado, I had to um, I had to give a presentation, which is pretty typical at universities, and I had these slides. So the first three slides in this slide deck are all directly from that same presentation. So I recycled it. Um, and so yeah, anyway, hopefully it's interesting somewhat. So just as some background. So I did grow up in Colorado. I went to Colorado State University for my undergrad and I majored in art history there. And it was there at CSU when I worked in a slide library and the photo resource center at the university. So the slide library was a legitimate 35 millimeter slide library in the art history department. This is before PowerPoint. Essentially, it was actually right on the cusp of digital slides and PowerPoint. But the parts that I enjoyed most about those jobs were organizing materials, describing the stuff, and helping people find what they needed in the slide library and also at the Photo Resources Center, which was like where they had all the staff photographers and they also had a small archive there. So that was in the early 2000s. And I mean, this was solely negative slides, prints, all analog stuff. So in my last semester as an art history student, the art librarian came in to talk to us about what we can do with an art history degree. And she told us about librarianship. And it was there in that class that I discovered that there was a profession that would allow me to do the things that I was really actually enjoying in my student jobs. Um, and I decided I wanted to go to library school and be an archivist. So I also knew that I didn't want to live in Colorado anymore. So I applied to Simmons. It was Simmons College at the time. Now it's Simmons University. Um, so I got into Simmons, packed up, moved to Boston, and then I had been trying to get back to Colorado ever since. But that's a whole nother story. Boston was great. Going to Simmons was really great. There's a lot of places that you can get internships and get experience, and I think that was really key to finding actual, professional work once I got out of grad school. So I graduated in 2007, and I knew that I wanted to try to get back to Colorado. But of course, there's not a whole lot of jobs in Colorado, not a whole lot in Denver. They're all very competitive. But there was a job at the University of Wyoming, and it was a 1-year grant funded job, and it paid $23,000 a year. And I thought, what the heck? It's close to home, and I can do 1 year in Wyoming, right? Well, I ended up staying there for 7 years. So I went to the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center. I don't know if you've heard of the American Heritage Center. Some people have, just because it's made a name for itself, especially in the archives profession. But it's a huge repository. They have over 90,000 linear feet of archival collections. The collections largely document the American West and like the oil and gas industry and environment and conservation. But then they also have a lot of collections documenting popular culture. Like they have Stan Lee's papers, the guy that founded Marvel Comics. And so they just have like a whole, I wouldn't say it's eclectic because I think it's a lot more focused now, but it's a huge repository. And so here at the University of Wyoming American Heritage Center, this is really where I started to like grow as an archivist, right? It's where my philosophy on access was really born, because access it is and was the number one priority at the AHC. Their priority was to make as many collections as accessible as possible. When I was there, Mark Green, who is the co-author of the MPLP article, he was the director there. So that gives you a sense of what their kind of the tenor there. So my first job, though, this 1-year grant position, was to actually reappraise and deaccession archival collections. So the AHC, they had a long history of acquiring thousands of collections without doing much appraisal. Some of these collections were very valuable and they still have them, but a lot of the collections were not valuable or just did not belong there. And so one of the goals was to, in order to provide better access, was to determine what should stay and what we should spend our resources on, and what should go, what should be deaccessioned. So I gained a ton of experience in reappraisal and deaccessioning. That led to multiple opportunities to present and to publish and to serve on committees in the Society of American Archivists. And really, it launched my career. And so when my year was up, when the grant was up, there was a permanent professional archivist job that was open, and I ended up getting it. And so I spent the next 6 years there, and I was mainly a processing archivist. So the AHC is big enough to have different departments. So they had the processing department and the reference department and the digitization department and so on and so forth. But as a processing archivist, I arranged and described all types of collections, all sizes, all formats. I really became very proficient in processing. But also 25% of my time, I was the university archivist. And so I worked with, units on campus to transfer their records. And I helped rewrite the retention schedule there. And part of this job too was I was the acquisitions archivist for underdocumented communities. So I was going around mainly Cheyenne and Laramie. The universities in Laramie, and Cheyenne is the capital. They're close together. Anyway, but I would ask people and organizations for their collections and try to work with donors to acquire those collections. So that was good experience there. And yeah, just got a ton of great experience. But after 7 years, I was ready to get out of Wyoming. I don't know if you've ever been to Wyoming, but and Jackson Hole doesn't count, but everywhere else in Wyoming is cold and windy 9 months out of the year. Maybe 3 months, it's okay, but it's a tough place to live. And it's also very rural, and it's very conservative too. It just wasn't for me, even though I met a lot of really, really nice, wonderful people there. So after 7 years, I applied for a job at UC Irvine as the assistant university archivist. I ended up getting it, and I packed up and moved to Southern California. And I was there for 3 years. And the core of my job was on university archives materials. So I was, working with departments to transfer materials, processing a lot of materials, accessioning a lot of materials, but it was all focused on university archives. So the University of California, Irvine, they have their big collecting focus is on Orange County. They also collect in critical theory. And so they have Jacques Derrida's papers. They have all these leading critical theorists in the world. They have their papers there. And I really didn't handle those too much, although I did serve on the reference desk and would, would sometimes help researchers with those collections. But the bulk of my job was the university archives materials, the records of the university. And that was a great experience too. UC Irvine is still the most well-funded institution that I've ever worked at. And so I got a lot of experience working with born digital records. I was able to learn EPAD, the emailing preservation and access tool, and got experience in instruction. So I was able to do a lot more reference than I was at the AHC, just because the AHC was kind of siloed in its departments. And at UCI, it was a smaller unit. And so everybody kind of did a little bit of everything. And so I got a lot more reference and outreach experience too. Here's some of the outreach that I did. Again, this is all for my interview back at UNC. It was also the 50th anniversary of UCI when I was there in 2015. And so that's another reason why we were doing so much outreach when I was there. And when I started there, I didn't realize just how much of an advantage it is to be part of the University of California system. That didn't even occur to me when I was going through the interview process. I didn't know. I'm not from California. I learned just how it all works, and that the University of California is one giant system, and there's these 10 campuses and all sorts of stuff. But they have the California Digital Library, which supports all of the libraries and archives, all 10 I think it's 10 campuses. And so that was huge to have that kind of support for working with born digital records, working with digitized records. And so I got a lot of really great experience there. The other thing that was really not unique, but kind of, it was a good learning experience at UC Irvine, is that they wrote everything down. So the American Heritage Center, I thought, was the pinnacle of access and processing, and it was, but they didn't have the written processes that UC Irvine did. So UCI had, their accessioning process was written down. Here's what you do in this situation. Here's what you do in that situation. And then the processing procedures were all written down and like written down beautifully so that you could come in as a new person and be consistent and follow the process. So that was a great lesson in written documentation. Um, and it was a great place to work, but I was really homesick there. I never really felt like I fit into Southern California, and I really just wanted to get back to Colorado. So, um, a job opened up at UNC at the University of Northern Colorado. I applied for it and gave this the start of this presentation that you're seeing, and I ended up getting it. Um, so this job was assistant archivist for special collections and archives. So I wasn't running the archives. Um, I was kind of like second in command is not really true, but I was like processing and accessioning and had my hands in all the things basically. Uh, and this job, I applied for it and took it because it was in Colorado, and but it was a bit of a culture shock to go from UCI to UNC just because it's just such a smaller university. It's not part of any made like the University of Colorado. No, it's like it's its own thing. And it was a little bit of a culture shock and a little bit of an adjustment, but I was really happy to be near my family and friends again. And it turned out to be a great place for me to take all of that experience that I had and apply it to the things at UNC. And I had a really great boss. I've always had really great bosses, and I know I've been lucky in that aspect. But my boss was very supportive. And so there were things that I wanted to do that he supported and that he allowed and that he helped me, see through. So like, for example, they had Archive Space, the collections management software, and I had used Archive Space at UCI. Like we used it to the max. We were actually one of the early adopters at UCI to use it. And so they were using it at UNC, but they hadn't really fully implemented it. And there was still work to be done. And so I was able to come in there and be like, oh, I totally know how to use the system. I know exactly what all these functions do, what everything does. So we're going to clean up finding aids and get the public interface going. So it was things like that I was really able to have a positive influence on. The other thing at UNC is that I got to do a lot more instruction. So the longer I worked there for 5 years, and the longer I worked there, the more opportunity I had to do just basic like bibliographic instruction in the library, like teaching students, how to find books and articles and databases and all that fun stuff. And I actually taught a 4-credit class to undergraduates in the history who were history majors. And so I got some really good experience there and was challenged there too in a lot of ways. But after a few years, I was kind of ready to be the boss. Like I had finally felt confident in my abilities. Like I had gone pretty much my whole career with imposter syndrome, and working at UNC, I was like, no, I can do this. Like I have a vision for how I want things run. And I just felt confident in a lot of my abilities. So I started applying to other jobs, and finally in 2022 got the job at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Before I move on, I do just want to say that, yes, I've been at these other 3 places, but I've applied for a lot more jobs than I got offers for. So I just want that to kind of like, I just want to say that. And hopefully it's a it's a hopeful thing. Like it's tough out there. You just have to keep applying. And anytime that I made it to like at least the first interview stage, I always tried to learn something from it when I didn't get the job. And, that was easier said than done sometimes, but just I had to take it as a learning experience and not as a totally demoralizing experience. So, so DM&S. So here's DM&S. I finally made it back to Denver, which is really where I wanted to be. I started in August of 2022. That was the best year of my life so far. Um, and my formal title is digital archivist, but I do oversee the archives. My title's digital archivist because my boss wanted the archives to focus on digital records and have digital archives be a big component in the archives where it wasn't before. And so I am a manager, but it's a small department, and so I still get to work with the collections on a regular basis and do some processing, do some accessioning. Sometimes I do digitization. And when I started at DM&S, I came into an empty department. So there was no one there. All the other archivists had left for one reason or another, and I was starting fresh, which is another reason why my title was digital archivist, because it was an opportunity to really start focusing on digital records. And so my priorities when I started, I was able to hire two people, one of whom was a temporary position and the other one was a permanent position. And the other priority was to implement our new digital asset management system. Well, not to just implement it, but to choose it and then to implement it. So this is my last slide. This just a few photos of me at work. I've got, so like here you can see the facilities are amazing. The collections space was open in 2014. So it's only, well, now it's 12 years old. So it's pretty new, but you can see we have this wonderful art storage. And then of course we have all of our boxes. And so it's the nicest facility I've ever worked in. It's even nicer than the American Heritage Center, just because it's so new and, the archivist got to plan for it. But yeah, this is us. This is a staged photo. My colleague Lauren here, she's actually an SJSU graduate. This is Hope. She was an intern. This is Elise. She was our temporary staff member who was helping us with the dams. And then up here, we've got us with our Teen Science Scholars, which is a cool program that the museum does, where it takes in high school students from like marginalized communities, essentially, and they get to work with scientists and sometimes archivists as well. And they spend about, well, it's changing, but these kids spent 6 weeks with us, and they did all sorts of fun things, and we did field trips. And anyway, and then this is our volunteer Jean, or one of our volunteers, who is being recognized at the volunteer award ceremony. So, okay, I've blabbed on for far too long. I knew I would, but that's basically my intro. And I would love to answer your questions.
That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Such an amazing array of experiences. And I know we got some good questions, and I'll let everyone take a minute to add more in the chat. I'll kick off with a question. I'll use my privilege as the speaker to ask what I was curious about, which is, was it an easy transfer between academic libraries and museums?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, it was. Okay, so one thing I didn't mention is that the other reason that I didn't want to stay at UNC, I was looking elsewhere, is because I was really tired of the tenure and promotion process. So not all university archive or academic archives jobs have tenure and promotion intertwined with their duties, but everywhere that I had worked, UW, UCI, UNC, I also had faculty duties in addition to the regular archive stuff. So that meant that I was expected to publish, present, and serve on professional committees. And I was really, really tired of mostly the publication part. I actually like serving on professional committees, and sometimes I like presenting, but the publication piece was, I was kind of like over it.
Great. Thank you. I mean,
So,
so often, I think you're the first person I've talked to that switched from one type of archive
oh,
to
interesting.
another.
Yeah,
So often people seem to go into one type and just stay there, which is great. But it's nice to know that flexibility is an option.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was an easy transition, and I'm really, really happy not having to worry about
Great.
doing all that extra stuff.
Awesome. I see
Yeah.
we could get some questions. So let's see, I'll start at the top. Um, in your experience, how do archivists share information? Do you find useful information about archival practices through informal conversations or conferences? I know at least part of that because I met you at a conference.
Hmm. That's a great question. I mean, I think conferences are a good way to share and learn. Um, I mean, I think a lot of it happens through, at least for me, a lot of it happens through SAA. So like the listservs and like the more casual, more informal presentations that the SAA sections are putting on. Some of so I not I assume you're all somewhat familiar with SAA and like kind of how it's structured since it's the SA, but who
This
knows?
chapter, but yes.
Yeah. So SAA has all these sections. And when you're a member of SAA, then you can join as many sections as you want. And then there's listservs and some sections have newsletters, they have blogs, and then they also have they try to put on at least a few events every year where it's usually like a virtual, they'll have a speaker talking about, whatever topic relates to that section's work, whether it's description or appraisal or yeah, there's tons of them. So for me, I get a lot of information. Like I share a lot of information and I get information just through the SAA lists and that community. And then also the SAA conference. Every time I go to that, I come back inspired and learning new things. Um, and of course, there's always the articles, like American the American Archivist publication, and but I don't spend a whole lot of time reading that. But usually I'll skim it and see if there's anything that's relevant to my work.
Great, thank you. All right, next one. How would you recommend getting experience in this field before graduating grad school? What areas would you say are most ripe for dipping one's feet into?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, experience is so key. I think, if you can afford to volunteer, then you could probably find a volunteer job. Obviously, paid internships are way more desirable, probably a lot more competitive. And I would say try to get experience in doing anything digital, whether it's digitizing a collection, whether it's doing metadata, describing the collection. If you can find an internship where you're going to get experience with born digital records, whether that's processing or accessioning them or providing access to them, whatever, that is going to give you a leg up on your resume.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I kind of hate to do this, but I'm going to shill my own presentation next month, March 15th. We're going to be hosting a Zoom meeting talking all about internships, volunteering, externships, fellowships, tips and tricks, things to know, things to discuss. we'll be having a presentation followed by Q&A. So that'll be fun. Keep your eye out.
Nice.
All right, next. In your intro, it mentioned that you manage one person. What about their application, resume, and or cover letter stood out to you? Any advice for what to highlight for those of us who are making career pivots? That's another great question.
Hmm. Well, it was 3 years ago when I hired that person. And I will say that was one of the most difficult hiring decisions that I've had because there were a lot of really, really good candidates. Um, and so I think, I mean, so it was, I will say every one of the candidates that made it to the interview stage, the cover letter and resume directly addressed the position, right? So, and I can't remember what the position description said, but I'm sure it says something about like arranging and describing and strong collections management and focus on access and things like that. And each of the candidates that made it to the interview round directly addressed all of those things, whether in the cover letter or the resume. So it's extremely tailored to the job posting. Um, and then it really, that was a tough, it was tough because there were so many good candidates. And that's the other hard thing about this field is that you can be a great candidate and make it to the interview stage and you just don't get the job for one reason or another. And so really it's, a lot of the times it is not personal. So I know that that's a kind of a non-answer. And I'm sure you've heard that a million times before, like cater your resume and cover letter directly to the job posting. When I apply for a job, I make a table and I write down all of the requirements from the posting. And then in the next column, I start filling in my experience or my education or anything that I have to speak to those things. Um,
Absolutely. I
yeah,
will say too, I appreciate the dose of reality, the reality check we all need, that we need to be patient, persistent in our job searches because it is tough out there. And I wouldn't want someone to pretend that it were otherwise if that's not the case. And
yeah.
also, I've never seen a slide deck as a part of an interview. That was really fun to see.
Yeah, yeah, and I can talk more about that too, because again, for academic jobs, especially the ones where you're required to publish and present, you're probably going to be presenting. You're going to have to give a presentation. It's going to be part of a full day thing. Like they
Okay.
really put you through it. Um, which is I mean, actually, that is like a really good way to figure out who you should hire, right? Because we don't do that at the museum. And so that was another thing. It was like, I've talked to these people for 2 hours total or something, right? Like, I haven't spent much time with people,
Yeah.
and you're expected to pick the person that's going to work out for hopefully, ever and ever. And
Hiring is tough.
yeah.
Okay, next question. Question for you. I find myself becoming more interested in archival work, but I worry about the demand for archivists.
Yeah.
One, is there a demand for archivists, especially those that are entry level? And two, how do I become a good candidate for these positions? I think you've somewhat addressed some of that, but please.
Yeah. So yeah, it is pretty competitive. I would say, well, I used to think that there were more entry level jobs than jobs that required a ton of experience. I will say even for the entry level jobs, you have to have you should have experience. Like you're going to be even for the entry level jobs, you're going to be competing with people that have experience. If it's a desirable place to live, like Denver, there's people I was applying to entry level jobs sometimes if if it was like the pay was okay and all that. Um, but that meant that people right out of grad school were competing with somebody with lots and lots of experience. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's just the reality of it. Um, and I think the way that you make yourself stand out is to have experience on your resume. And, also it doesn't hurt to network. And so, like, that's the other good thing about experience is that your manager or your boss probably knows a few other archivists, and you might apply to a place where you know somebody that knows somebody and they can put in a good word for you. That's another, that is one. I don't think that's the only reason, but when I applied to UCI, I had a friend that put in a good word for me for the hiring manager there. So
You are not the first person I've heard say that networking is really strong in the archival community and that it goes a long way to know people and just encouraging people to reach out and meet new people.
yeah, yeah, it's true.
All right, let's see. Here's one that says, I'm a teacher in Denver and I'm a huge fan of DMNS educator nights that allow us teachers into the archives to see items that aren't on display. Is this a program that you would recommend to other archives? P.S. Go UNC Bears. All
Nice.
right.
That's awesome. Hey, um, yes, so the educator nights is all coordinated and run by a totally different unit. It's I don't even know what unit it is, honestly. It's like adult and family programming or something like that, or community outreach or something. Um, and so I'm trying to think. And of course, the museum, it's like we've got a huge museum that educators can come to, and so they can come to the collections, but they can also just go to the museum. Um and then there's other departments that always want to like talk to educators too. So I think any sort of after hours outreach, it's always like it doesn't hurt. However, I will say that I'm imagining like UNC trying to do an educators night, like their archives trying to do an educators night. It's a small department. It's up in Greeley. I don't like. I think it'd be an interesting pilot, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know how successful it would be. Because the other thing is that we feed the educators too, so we always have free food. And I think no, I don't. I think it's a cash bar, so not free drinks, but so that helps get them through the door too. But yeah, I like that idea.
Well, okay. Did you work or intern at academic libraries or museums before finishing graduate school? Was one of these types of organizations your goal from the start?
Mm. I will say it was not my goal from the start. I was kind of willing to take a job, any kind of job. That's why I ended up working for $23,000 a year when I first got out of grad school, because I was kind of desperate. So when I was at Simmons, I interned at a lot of places. I did like a lot of small internships, like 3 months long. And at the time, Simmons required, I think they required three different internships. It's changed now since like the whole perspective on internships has changed a lot since I was in grad school. But I interned at Harvard University's herbarium archives. I interned at, actually, I think it was mostly universities. So Tufts University, and I ended up working at Tufts University too. And also, what was that was a Tufts. Oh, it was at Harvard. The Fogg Art Museum had their own archives, and that now archive or Harvard is a lot more centralized. So, but back then they had all these tons of little archives. So it was mostly in academia. However, my first library slash archives job was actually an architecture firm. It's called DeMella Schaefer, and it was kind of like records managing managing the plans and things, the architectural plans and drawings, um, under the guy that ran the department. But that was my first archives and library job. So yeah, so there was no, I did not have a plan. It just kind of worked out that way. I think that academic archivists, well, I can never remember if it's federal archive. Well, probably now it's not. Probably now it's academic archivists are the majority of the different, that's like the majority type of archivist that is out there.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think second is federal government archivists.
All right. Now we have a big pivot, and the question is, what digital asset management system did you select and why?
Ooh, so we selected one called NetX. I don't know, it's not very heavily used in libraries and archives. It's used by a lot of corporations. It was created for, marketing departments. And however, we did select it in part because the Field Museum is using it. Um, and there's a couple other museums that were using NetX and our collections management system that we use, which is called EMU, which is not an archives collections management system, but we use it anyway. It's meant for museum objects. So the Field Museum, and there was a few other museums that were using EMU, and they had contracted with NetX for their dams. And we had high hopes that the two systems would talk to each other easily. For all sorts of reasons I will not get into, that has not been the case. So it's been, so that's been, I don't know, it's whatever, but,
That's technology.
um, yeah, so that's really the big reason why we chose it. We looked at a lot of different dams. The other thing we liked about NetX is that it still has a folder structure. There's a lot of dams that did away with their folder structures. So you're just essentially tagging things and bringing things up based on searches. And I don't know, the folder structure really, as an archivist. And I love that kind of hierarchy. So that resonated with me and the team. And yeah, I mean, those were kind of the two big things. A lot of dams have the exact same functionalities. Um, NetX just seemed to like it was going to work for us, and the price was right too.
It's always good. All right.
Yeah,
Next, we have, would you recommend any particular tools or skills to learn ahead of applying for digital archivist jobs? This person does not have a tech background, and they're trying not to get overwhelmed by all the different kinds of apps and software platforms. Fair question.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think Tree Size Pro is a good one to learn and to put on your resume. I've been using that one a lot recently for well, it does all sorts of things. It's really good at like analyzing a directory on your computer and telling you things about it. And it'll also do a directory print, which is nice. It will identify duplicates and you can dedupe things with it. It does all sorts of stuff and it's really useful and it's not that expensive. Um, well, it's not expensive for the pro version. Like if you're in a, company, it's like $200 or something. And then you have the license and you don't pay anymore. I think they have a free version too. And I know that there's a ton of tutorials and, you know, things like that out there for tree size.
I'll make it more
Um,
of a meta question. I mean, you work in one institution it seems like most institutions have their own software suites, their own apps and platforms that they use that fit their needs, whatever they happen to be. But are there any more common ones that people should be aware of that they might want to explore, try to get experience with that have name recognition that
yeah,
I could name a few, but I'd rather hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of archivists are using tree size,
Okay.
so I do recommend that one. There's there's like Bit Curator, which is sometimes we don't use it right now. We probably need to we probably should think about incorporating it. Um, there's Bagger, which I think is part of Bit Curator. I can never remember how the two are intertwined, but those are all open source and they were specifically designed for working with archival records and for archival preservation. Uh,
Okay, so I have another question, which I
yeah.
like to ask people, which is the hot topic of the day. Do you use AI tools in your archival work, or do you have plans to?
So I mainly use AI for helping me draft things, or like I'll draft something and I'll ask AI, please make this, clearer and correct it for flow and things like that. Um, so that's mainly what I found AI useful for as far as like efficiency, like grant writing, or even like if I have to respond to a donor to tell them I don't want their collection, I'll draft an email and then I'll ask AI to make it nicer or make, whatever. And it does that stuff really, really well. I recently tested it on describing a Born Digital collection. And so I fed it all of the folder titles, all of the file titles, and I said, create a scope and content summary, for an archival finding aid, essentially. And it sucked at it. It was like, oh, there's this many images, and it said it was mostly moving images because the moving image files took up so much space. And I'm like, no, that's not, I know, I'm looking. It's not mostly movies and things like that. Um,
That's somewhat
so
reassuring to hear that with skills are still needed.
yeah, I know. I was glad that it could not do
Yeah,
that as
yeah,
easily as it can, like, you know, write me a email that sounds lovely.
fair.
Yeah, but a lot of archives are experimenting and have had some success with using AI for description.
Interesting.
And there's been a couple of times when I've thought, well, I wonder if I could plug this into AI and, like, you know, maybe it could build me all these different spreadsheets I need. And it probably could, but then I was like, well, the time that it takes me to tell it what to do and to like train it. And I just have basic chat GBT or Copilot. I don't have any of the professional level ones. Like I could probably just do it on my own in the same amount of time. So
All right. All
yeah.
right. Let's see the next question. Is the amount of relocating that you've done considered regular or above average? Has that changed over the years?
I don't know. I I think it's a little bit above average. I'm trying to think of my colleagues, and yeah, I mean, I think that that most people don't relocate quite as much or quite as, like Wyoming to California to Colorado, then down I-25. Like, I think, yeah. But some people probably do way more than me, especially people in temporary positions.
Fair enough. Okay. Let's see. Do you think international experience is seen as valuable on a resume?
That's a really good question. I really think it depends on what you did and where it was, because like if it's in Canada, I think that can't, I think, well, and I admit, like, I don't know a whole lot about international archives. What I do know is I don't even know if it's true. Like, I think that a lot of American archivists have have preconceptions, or they, which are accurate or not, that like repositories in Europe are not very access focused, or there's a lot of repositories where you're going to have to, go through a whole approval process if you want to be a researcher. There's things like that that I think, especially if you are in a repository that is very access focused, um, where that experience could be diminished a little bit if the archivist has that notion. Yeah, but I do really think, again, like, my I if I was reviewing a resume, I would see, read what they did and where it was. And if it's like, oh, you were building finding aids and digitizing records, and like, okay, obviously it's not true that not all repositories are, you know, behind locked doors and locked down. So that's my 2 cents.
That's cool. I know it's making me want to research that more. That's a really good.
Yeah.
Okay, we are coming close to the end of the hour, but we do have the next question, which is, can you describe the museum's metadata strategy?
Sort of. So the museum has a lot of different collections, right? So the archives is part of the collections branch, which also includes anthropology, earth sciences, and zoology. And so these are three areas that are very different from archives in their metadata. They're all describing things at the object level, very museumy, you know. It's kind of cut and dry. Like, you've got a bone, you're going to describe it. So that's kind of the general setting. Um, it was the metadata strategy. So, okay, well, I might have to ask follow up if you're talking about like metadata in terms of for digital objects. So that's kind of more specific, or you mean like all metadata, all description, our finding aids, our catalog records?
The limitations of chat. Since we only have a few minutes, you get to decide.
Yeah,
You
well,
the
I
answer.
mean, I can talk about the archives essentially. So we are trying to become more archive standards, like use archive standards, use DAX, have finding aids. Right now, we really don't have any finding aids, um, because of the way that we've done it for so long. So we've used this collections management system. It's a museum system, and all of our stuff is described. All of our stuff is described, I think, but it's all described at like the folder level or the box level or the item level. So we don't have the contextual collection level information. So we are working on a project to do that, because it's super important to have that context, and it also helps with efficiency of managing the stuff. Um, so yeah, so there's that piece. And then of course we have our digital asset management system, which has all of our which does have item level metadata for the files, right? Um, yeah, if you want to email me after, I can hopefully answer your question a little bit better. But that's kind of the broad strokes, I'd say.
Would you want to share your email in the chat?
Yeah, yeah,
That would be very kind. Thank you. You've been very generous.
no problem.
All right, we have just a couple minutes left. If anyone has a last minute there, thank you very much.
Yeah, these are
All right,
great
well, just say
questions.
thank you very much. Thank you for joining us with your wealth of experience. You worked some really amazing places, and I love that you were learning new skills in every place that you learned and
Yeah, always.
really
And even,
communicate your passion for archival work in all of its forms. So I appreciate that.
oh, yeah. Well, yeah, feel free to follow up if anybody wants to. Otherwise, this was a lot of fun, and thank you so much for having me.
We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. And good to see everyone tonight. Keep your eye on SAASC for our upcoming events. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.